And to get more insights on the country's growing literacy problem and the challenges faced by the education sector, we now have on the show Philippine Business for Education Executive Director Hanibal Camua. Magandang umaga po sa inyo.
Good morning, Ma'am Gretchen. Good morning din po sa lahat ng tagapakinig ng Morning Matters.
Okay.
Thank you for having me.
24.8 million functionally illiterate Filipinos, a number that the EDCOM2 has said has nearly doubled in the past 30 years. Help us appreciate this number first because meron na rin pong lumabas back in May of 2025 na 18.9 million. That was from 2019 to 2024. Does that mean that grumabe siya in the recent years compared to the past 20 years? How do we see this number?
Well, I think what the reference that EDCOM2 in their recent press release is actually from that FLEMS results then way back in April 30 or early May. They're actually referencing to that. But the point of, let's say, what they say here that it has doubled for the past 30 years was also during the time when the first Congressional Commission on Education, or EDCOM1, was established. The number was actually at around 14 million functionally illiterate. So it has doubled from since, no? From the past, during the time ng EDCOM1, around 14 million lang yan. So ngayon, it's around 28 million. No? During that release of the FLEMS in early May, the 19 million na functionally illiterate na sinasabi, it's actually accrued, parang ano siya, no, raw interpretation siya from that of, because they changed the definition of functional literacy for that iteration of the FLEMS, no. Tinaasan yung criteria. And hence medyo delikado yon na i-minus lang, you subtract, let's say, the functionally illiterate nung previous version versus now the new definition or the new version. So kaya doon na-derive yung 19 million. Pero medyo hasty po yun or medyo spotty yung ganoong analysis.
Pero ito pong sinasabi ng EDCOM2, ano na po yung definition ng functional illiteracy dito? Are they using the new definition? And can you remind us what that is about again?
Yes. So sa bagong definition which was used this year, no, it's a higher level definition wherein kapag functional literacy yung pinag-uusapan, dapat able to read, write, comprehend and have some basic, no, problem solving, let's say, metric. So hindi katulad yan dati na sa previous definition niya, read, write, and comprehend. Tapos napasama na dapat at least, kung high school graduate na, at least high school graduate, automatic functionally literate. Hindi na po ganun yung definition ngayon. Sa bagong definition, dapat you must be able to read, write, comprehend, and compute. No? Regardless kung hindi na po natin sinama na automatic yung high school graduate. So kaya doon din po lumobo din po yung number of functionally illiterate natin ng mga Pilipino.
So ibig sabihin ito pong bagong definition at yung mga datos po, kasama na rin ho ba yung mga hindi talaga nakapag-aral? Or are they just measuring here the ones in the educational system?
Kasama po yung mga hindi po nakapag-aral at hindi po nakapagtapos din ng pag-aaral. So I think the age range here is around 10 to 64 years old.
And which test was used to measure functional literacy?
The functional literacy, itong FLEMS survey is done by the PSA. So comprehensive po ito ng Philippine Statistics Authority. And particularly yun po is it's also us, no, yung PSA stepping up because one of the major critique of the previous versions of the FLEMS is hindi siya up to international standards. Kaya merong mismatch. Let's say for example, bakit sa mga previous version ng FLEMS yung ating functional illiteracy is at this level, pero kapag pinangga mo siya sa international, let's say, assessments, let's say for example like PISA or TIMSS, mababa. So ngayon, and that's the reason why there was this adjustment na kailangan higher level learning ang sinusunod at minimeasure kapag nagme-measure tayo ng functional literacy. Pero again, this is a very alarming figure, and from us in PBed, sinasabi namin that ito po ay isang manifestation of the ongoing learning crisis in our country. 24 million is not, hindi birong number po yan. 24 million Filipinos functionally illiterate. So, ibig sabihin, mahihirapang maghanap ng trabaho, mahihirapan po yung, let's say, to create economic opportunities. As well.
So, ito pong FLEM survey, hindi pa po siya nasa international standard, itong latest one?
So, ano na to?
Updated na din.
Sinabay nila because of the updated definitions.
And then, how is the test done? Because there's also a mass media exposure component to this. Is this magsusulat talaga o pakikipag-usap ito?
I'm not really familiar, Gretchen. I'm sorry. I'm not really familiar with, let's say, the test administration, no? Because particularly this is done by us, what I've said, ng PSA. Pero I think this is a combination of several survey methods. Let's say, for example, merong tests, and I think you're correct. There would be some form of let's say writing to measure, let's say, comprehension and also computation.
Parang hindi pa po kasi umaabot sa akin yung phlegm survey na yan. I mean, is this, pag working ka na, hindi ka nakasama rito. I mean, is this 18 below or just to understand the demographics?
So the age range is 10 to 64 years old. And I think the PSA is doing this nationwide. And I think baka hindi tayo nasama sa sampling because I wasn't able to be part of this or to be a respondent of this. So there's a sampling method done by PSA.
I guess we have to ask throw those questions towards the PSA to be able to understand that. But now we go to the functional literacy and the causes. We know we've talked about this many times, but this is the first time that it's been brought up that the DepEd is involved in many interagency bodies, more than 260. How does this manifest in their everyday work?
So, given that number, 261 interagency membership, and almost 30, I think, 30 of that they are leading or co-leading with the other education agencies. Makikita na medyo wala sa focus, no? Nawawala sa focus yung ahensya. Particularly, it adds to the workload, not only of the agency at the national level, but more so, it is manifested na yung additional workload na yan sa mga teachers at sa mga schools. So let's say for example, those functions or ng interagency bodies like on drug, let's say awareness on drug use, even on DRRM na nakaupo sila. Also, teachers are doing, let's say, tasks on supplementary feeding, even on vaccination programs with the Department of Health. Other functions as well during elections. So, nandyan yan, no? So, my take there is parang it takes away time from the agency, from DepEd, and from the teachers to really focus on what they need to deliver, which is on learning outcomes, which is on particularly literacy, no? And numeracy ng ating mga learners. So, it's a manifestation, no? Of, let's say, nawawala sa focus ang ating mga DepEd as an agency and our teachers who are implementing all these interagency functions that DepEd and other education agencies are part of.
To be able to put specifics to that, no, apart from the drug use, the feeding, the vaccination programs, and the elections, kasama rin doon, meron pang vision screening, meron pa yung 4Ps, meron pa yung DSWD, DOH, DRRMC, at marami pang iba. Malaki po talaga yung tiwala natin sa ating mga guro. Pero at some point, you gotta draw the line. How do you see this being managed more effectively if even in terms of staffing, we are lacking in guidance counselors for one? Paano kaya ma-unburden ang mga teachers? Do you think that administrative officers will be able to do the job? Because DepEd says it plans to hire AOs.
Tama po, meron din pong plano ang DepEd to, let's say, para mapunan yung ganong pagkukulang, especially at the school level, to hire additional administrative officers. The target, I think, is all schools dapat at least merong isang administrative officer. But then if you're going to look at it at the school level din kasi, no, ang isang administrative officer, ano ang kanyang functions? Kapag nag-hire ng isang administrative officer ba, it will cover all those functions ba that are actually mandated by all this interagency leadership and memberships na kasama ang DepEd? Because by the end of the day, ang nakasanayan dyan, and the challenge there is yung i-break yung nakasanayan na everything data gathering on vaccination, on let's say on 4Ps, si teacher kaagad yan. But then hindi natin nakikita na it takes away time for teachers. The teachers would teach, let's say, for around 6 hours, 6 to 7 hours. In some schools, mas mahaba pa dyan because of shifting of classes. After ng turo, magle-lesson planning pa yan. So there are a lot of tasks, and nandyan yan, no? Nasa pag-aaral po yan ng DepEd na majority of ng DepEd at ng EDCOM, na majority of our teachers are already overburdened. While the administrative officers, having administrative officers will help, I think it's really to streamline, no? To streamline this interagency leadership and membership na kasama ang DepEd at education agencies. Streamline it and make sure na yung membership ng DepEd, ng CHED at ng TESDA is on the education focus only. No? So let's make sure na member sila ng mga interagency bodies na to, but focus on education. Hindi na nagiging miyembro sila because sila yung may kakayanan na maglista, sila yung may kakayanan na pumunta sa mga nandoon yung presence nila sa local government.
Pero paano ho kaya, no? Siyempre, naiintindihan ko po yung sinasabi po ninyo. Pag nag-hire ka ng administrative officer, effectively, kung isa lang yan, managerial load lang yung matatanggal niya off the weight of, or off the backs of the teachers. They will still be the ones doing the hard work of doing yung personal I guess administration to the students, no. Pero do you propose that all of these functions be removed from the school setting, moved away, or how do you make that na they will be more focused on education and learning when nandito nga po yung sa periphery yung mga services na yan na kaakibat nung pag-aaral.
So I think it's not really removing or I would say it's not really removing or tanggalin lahat ng mga interagency functions na ito, no? Because there are really also there's those interagency functions that are really serviced on education and learning. But I think making sure na itong mga memberships ng education agencies natin, particularly ng DepEd, on these bodies are actually the name of streamlining and efficiency. Hindi na kasama ang DepEd dyan kasi sila yung may kakayanan, sabi ko nga, sila yung may kakayanan maglista, sila yung may kakayanan mag-reach out until the barangay level. Because we should also think about that local governments are also there. And that's the reason why, for the longest time, PBed has been advocating for this decentralization of education. Dapat we empower local governments more to lead, let's say, education initiatives. No? And we make local governments as well accountable for learning outcomes. Babalikan ko lang, Gretchen, yung kaninang sinasabi natin about functional literacy. Top 10 na nakalagay doon sa functional illiteracy na survey released last May, top 10 provinces nakalagay doon. 8 are in Mindanao. If I am a governor of that province, tapos ako'y nasa top 10, but then I have a very, very little to, let's say, minimal influence on, let's say, education outcomes, aligning of curriculum, so and so, those things are actually planned at the central level, or at the national level. So I think as our governors or our local governments right now, wala silang masyadong power, no, to influence, really contribute to education programs to make sure na yung kanilang mga lokalidad ay naaabot yung mga learning outcomes ng mga mag-aaral. For those who had the resources, pwede yun, they can do that. But how about for those who are also limited with resources? And again, evidence would show us that functional illiteracy results nung April would show us that those who are actually also top 10 in the functionally illiterate ng mga provinces are also those who are provinces na napakataas ng poverty incidence.
Secretary Angara, I think echoes your call for a more localized structure for education. But how could this be devolved to the LGU but still remain, I guess, national standards for education? Ano kaya yung maaaring maipasa sa local government?
Yep. I think now you hit it right on the head of the nail. No? Na sinabi na yung direction setting and curriculum, let's say, should remain with the national level. Kasi syempre direction setting yan central office yan. Pero I think just in terms of procurement, no? Construction of classrooms, every time na lang na nagkakaroon tayo ng opening of classes, ano yung mga top 3 na problema? Number 1, kakulangan sa classroom. Why don't we do procurement and classroom construction at the local level and make local governments accountable on, let's say, classroom construction? That's number 1. Second is on teachers. Ang dami nating kakulangan sa teachers. 165,000 na backlog on teachers. Bakit? Why don't we make local hiring of teachers, hiring of administrative officers na sinasabi natin, also localized, that it's the local government that will determine, no? Titingnan natin dito sa lokalidad nila, ano bang mga guro ang kailangan? STEM teachers ba? PE teachers ba? Guidance and values education teachers ba? Sila yung nakakaalam nun So dapat sila yung merong kumpas on teacher hiring. And third is on textbooks. Textbooks and also learning materials procurement. So, dapat sa local level din yung procurement niyan. Kasi kung sa national level yung procurement, and we all know this, doon nanggagaling yung problema because national level yung procurement, tapos yung logistics sa pagpapadala niyan, yung pagde-deliver ng libro, nangangalahati na yung school year. We're almost halfway to the school year, but there are still schools na hindi pa nakakatanggap ng kanilang mga libro. So just on those top 3 issues, if we can empower local government units to have more stake on those issues and empower them and make them accountable at the end. So I think it's a good start for decentralization or devolution of education.
As a final question, there are other Southeast Asian countries which have been very successful when it comes to their own education sector. Our neighbor for one, like Vietnam, has been registering high functional literacy rates. What are they doing right? And what can we pattern after? At kamusta yung ibang mga neighbors po natin, katulad na Indonesia, Malaysia, Cambodia, Singapore, and Laos?
On Vietnam, I think EDCOM2 did a benchmarking study in Vietnam like a year ago or almost 2 years ago, and what they found out was there's a lot of Filipino teachers there. Ang daming mga Pinoy na teachers doon. So if kung madaming Filipino teachers doon, so I think it speaks of the let's say yung compensation or yung treatment natin or the opportunities that we give to our teachers, no? though may mga nakasalang na mga, let's say, priority legislations to make sure that our teachers are compensated well, may mga teachers ba din talaga tayo na nagkakaroon or that would grab the opportunity to, let's say, be employed abroad. Pero mahina din yung ating pipeline of teachers. So let's say for example, nagkakaroon ba tayo or meron ba tayong datos na out of the 165,000 na pagkukulang sa mga teachers, kasama ba doon yung mga nangingibang bansa? At ano yung pipeline natin? Meron ba tayong program na mag-supply ng mga teachers in the next 3 years na pinoproduce ng ating, let's say, teacher education institutions or ng mga colleges and universities natin dito sa Pilipinas. So that's number one, no? What are they doing, right? They're taking care of their teachers, providing them with good compensation and benefits package. That's number one. Second is, I think, in the case of our neighboring countries, they have always put education as a priority. Titingnan natin yung education spending nila versus our education spending. For the longest time, no, hindi natin nami-meet yung at least 4% of the GDP should be allocated to education. While this year or for next year's budget, sinasabi na umabot na siya ng 4%. But kami sa PBed, we're still asking, ano yung naging computation? Bakit paano tayo umabot ng 4% of the GDP? Is that computation just focus on DepEd, CHED, and TESDA, or does it include all other education, quote-unquote, no, ng mga activities ng other agencies? So I think investments, titingnan natin gaano kalaki ang ini-invest ng ating gobyerno on education alone, and apart from investment as well, how well or how efficient do we allocate those investments? Are we allocating those investments in those areas that contribute directly to learning outcomes? Let's say, for example, sa kakulangan ng textbook, kakulangan ng mga guro, at internet connectivity, let's say, or digital resources. So I think that yun yung mga ilan sa mga ginagawa ng ating mga karating bansa like Vietnam, Malaysia, and Indonesia na I think we're still quite lagging behind.
Making it a priority and also putting the appropriate resources into those priorities loud and clear. We have Philippine Business for Education Executive Director Hanibal Camua explaining to us the latest report from the PSA, 24.8 million functionally illiterate Filipinos in the past 30 years. Maraming salamat for helping us appreciate the context behind those numbers. Thank you very much for your time.
Maraming salamat din po, Ms. Gretchen, and to your team. Thank you for having me.